Film Trace. This is a podcast where we trace the life of a film from conception to production all the way to release and reception. It is season 4 of Film Trace. We have picked a real doozy of a film season 4. I guess did you technically nudged me to pick this?
It was a suggestion because you're picking the new movies this season. We alternate, so the odd number episodes. Dan will pick new movies for us to trace the life of, and even number episodes, I will pick some older films that are new to streaming. But when Dan, you asked me to think about, how long we wanted to have a hiatus between season 3 and 4, I was like, well, there's a certain movie coming out on Netflix, May 21. Should we start with
Zach Snyder's Army of the Dead?
Yeah.
Which came out in theaters May 14th last week, a Cinemark exclusive, which is a whole thing we'll have to talk about because it's like one of the first major releases that Netflix is doing in the theaters. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so premiered on Netflix May 21st. I think before we dive into the film itself and what it's all about, we do have to talk about Zach Snyder and why we picked this and why I think why we're both fascinated by his aura, his brand. I don't know what you would call it. What are we trying to pinpoint here? What are we talking about?
His ability to achieve a collective stupor when it comes to blockbuster movies. I don't know. Here's the thing. I don't hate the guy. I mean, I don't like much of what he's made, but I appreciate the fact that he's able to connect with people. But I am most concerned and confused because it seems like everybody agreed up until a few months ago that he made pop trash.
Yeah.
And sometimes the pop trash worked for me, even though I have kind of stayed away from him since. I do legitimately like 2004 debut of his, the Dawn of the Dead remake. I think it's a really fun and true to the spirit of the original, even if it goes completely in a different direction execution wise. And he managed to get some really great performances out of his cast, including lead actor Sarah Polley, who I very much miss being in the movies.
Yeah.
And yet he went on a trajectory that was just kind of filled with just overblown excess and was just kind of gross. I think Sucker Punch is probably one of my least favorites. But then DC happened. And so my main reason for coming at this was twofold. Number one, he's coming back to where he began. And especially after taking a hiatus himself after the death of his child, and kind of coming back, starting all over again with the same kind of story that he started his career with, coupled with the fact that the Snyder Cut caused such an uproar in the film community these past few months. It started out as a joke that people were like, oh my gosh, these nerds are really going to make this happen. That's crazy. And then it does happen. And a lot of legitimate film critics and respectable people on social media are like, actually, Zack Snyder's a genius. This movie's perfect. I still haven't seen it. I'm not trying to watch a 4-hour version of a movie that I fell asleep during 3 years ago. But I don't know. What do you think? What brought the world back together that Zack Snyder had?
Well, it's funny, but we think that the Snyder Cut was this big deal, and it was it was an HBO marketing ploy to get people to subscribe to HBO Max.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big part of why they pushed this thing. They knew it was a joke, they knew it was a meme, but marketing people love memes because they get regurgitated so easily, such a through a group of people that just wants more of it. And what's funny about that is there was a study about people who started Justice League, the Snyder Cut, and I think 60% of them didn't finish. So it's one of those things where it's almost as if the meme or the whatever it is, there's not a ton of substance behind it, but it does get companies to move. And they did give him millions of dollars to do this. And it also led, I think, the support behind Snyder led to this Army of the Dead being made. It was a big reason why it got green lit, that he just has this sort of aura to him. I mean, I would just remember Batman versus Superman, it really brought out this weird sort of us versus them thing between DCEU people And I don't even have you met anybody who's a DC fan? Like a
I mean,
huge DC fanboy. I've never met a single person in my life.
I teach high schoolers, so yes.
Oh, okay, yeah. What are they like? I mean, like, how are they different than a Marvel fanboy?
The thing is that the kids that are coming to mind,
Yeah,
like both.
exactly.
But there's something about like it goes back to when the Nolan Batman trilogy came out, where there was a certain subset of people that were like, okay, superhero movies can be fun, sure, but what I've always wanted was like a grim, dark take on the mythic legend of blah 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 blah.
Yeah. Okay.
And so like I do think that there's some of that resonating, but I think still like if you watch Snyder's trilogy, is it a trilogy? I don't know. If you watch Snyder's superhero movies and compare them to Nolan's trilogy, even though Nolan's trilogy is definitely not perfect by any means, it's really confounding me to think that anybody would think that Snyder is on the level of any of the other stuff that kind of legitimized that superhero genre.
Well, it's completely different. Like Nolan Nolan's striving. They're both very ambitious filmmakers, but I think Nolan is striving for like, I don't know, like a philosophical take on these characters. Do you think Snyder's doing that? No. Like his take is like a mile wide, but an inch deep. I mean, he the earlier stuff that you're talking, like Dawn of the Dead, is a really fun movie. It is. It's a fun film. You can sit down and watch it and be like, this is a good time. I think it has nothing to do with the original, like at all. Like it's almost completely juxtaposed that film.
Sure.
A completely different like angle that it's trying to take. And then once I'm not going to get into people on like Reddit who would be like, oh, the remake's better than the original. I can't even go there.
No.
300, whatever. Watchmen, again, one of my favorite pieces of literature ever written is the Watchmen graphic novel.
Yeah.
And I'm watching this movie and I'm like, Snyder there is a poptimism type thing going on with him where he makes these very lush, very rich cinematic scenes, and his use of music, which we're going to see in Army of the Dead a bit, it is fascinating and interesting. More than anything, it's intriguing and it's engaging on some level, but that's it. There's not much else going on there, and I think that's what attracts people so much. He's a commercial director. That's how he got his start, was doing commercials, along with like Michael Bay and I think David Fincher, like on that whole world. And this is a big comeback for him, because I would say from a critical perspective, Batman versus Man of Steel, complete failure. Batman versus Superman, epic failure. Huge failure on a financial level as well. And then Justice League, I think, speaks for itself, like a total mess. Yep. And then we've had this rehabilitation that goes on, because I think there's just a lot of people that wanted him to do well. There's a lot of people that like him. He seems to be very close with his fans and very active in terms of social media and stuff like that. Very like has that direct connection with his sort of zealots, is his little circle.
Right.
And so there's a lot. I think there's a lot riding on Army of the Dead being this comeback, and that's kind of the story that's been played out here. Let's talk a little bit about what this movie's about. Like, what is it about? I mean, the plot's just absurd. You want to read what's the plot line? It doesn't even matter. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but tell me about it.
No, but everybody's been just saying that it's what if Ocean's 11 had zombies, which is pretty much the long and short of it. It's a zombie outbreak, specifically in Las Vegas, and a group of mercenaries take the ultimate gamble, according to the official logline, by venturing into the quarantine zone for the greatest heist ever. It's cookie cutter, but I mean, it was actually a pull for me. Like, I have to admit, I'm a sucker for heist movies and I'm a sucker for zombie movies. So even if Snyder is going to be behind the camera, I'm in. I'm super in. So there was also like a legitimate part of me where I was like, okay, he did kind of hit, sorry for using a gross term, my pleasure centers. And and so like, and because he's a poptimist, because there's another pop related word that I saw in, I think, Brian Tallarico's review of the film, Splatter Pop, I think is a good kind of description of what's going on here. And, you know, it's kind of like he's leaning into a lot of his more zany aesthetic from years past, because it's arguably, I would not call it a comedy by any means, because anything that is an attempt at a joke in the script falls flat. But it's got a sense of fun to it that I think the original Dawn of the Dead had, but then it also has this really garish quality to it that movies like 300 and Sucker Punch had. But I don't know. I had trouble, like, I will say it's probably the movie of his that I've enjoyed the most since Dawn of the Dead, but that's a pretty low bar, right?
Yeah, depending on who you are, right? It's, for me, it's a super low bar, because like I hate Batman vs Superman so much. Yeah, I remember I rented that on VOD on a Saturday and just fell asleep for like 2.5 hours. I got the Ultimate Edition, and it's just unwatchable. But yeah, I mean, it's the plot is so dumb to this movie that it works. You know, a heist film in Las Vegas. Basically, Las Vegas gets overrun by a Zeus is the zombie. And you know, it's a military thing, Area 51, all this like really vague stuff that it goes zero depth, none. And it doesn't really matter all that much, because you want to get to the shooting, you want to get to the zombies like quick. Which is hard to do in a movie that's like 2 hours and 40 minutes long, I think, or something like that.
Yeah.
It's very long. But I think, you know, it starts out with a bang, and it really does. It comes across as a pretty, like, some of the reviewers like it's like this really like tight movie. It's not tight per se. It's just blunt. And there's not a lot of nuance to what's going on screen, I think, from a story perspective. Visually, 100%. Like, he even talks about like the opening sequence where this Zeus zombie gets out of this military convoy. Like, they spent like 5 weeks shooting that because he wanted to get like a very specific, like with the natural lighting. That's another thing to note here. He's his own director of photography for this, which I think is that the first time he's done this? I thought I read that.
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. The first time he's been his own director of photography. And, you know, I think the one thing that I'm fascinated by in terms of, you know, how this thing got started, I think it was originally announced back in like 2007. And then I also read somewhere else that it was also kind of going hand in hand with Dawn of the Dead, that he had this idea for this movie after he did Dawn of the Dead, or while he was doing Dawn of the Dead, and they announced it, and then it kind of went through that development hell phase. Why do you think initially this was attached to Warner Brothers, but then Netflix picked it up for a $90 million production budget? Why do you think they picked it up?
You know, I think I was actually thinking that a lot during the opening scene of the film in particular, because, I mean, I hope it's not a spoiler to say that essentially Snyder's thesis statement, whether it's accidental or deliberate, Roadhead starts the zombie apocalypse. And so, like, when that is clearly the catalyst for the inciting incident, my brain immediately goes like, really, Netflix? Like, did they even read the script, or did they just see Zack Snyder and zombies and think that it was fish in a barrel? One of the interesting details about the production of this film is that there's a discrepancy between what Netflix has stated, and usually they don't state their production budgets.
Correct.
But there is a clear discrepancy in the media between what Netflix states was the budget they gave to Snyder, $90 million, which is a really good amount, but definitely not like what you would expect if this was like a traditional Hollywood studio movie.
Yeah.
And then Snyder's have just refuted it. They've said that's not true, but they haven't offered their own number. And so I wonder, like, I mean, you're the box office analyst of the duo here, Dan. Why would there be a discrepancy, and why would the Snyders, both Zach and his co-producer / wife Deborah, not provide what they think to be a more realistic number?
Well, I don't even think they know what it is, to be honest with you. I don't think Zach Snyder's the type of person who's going through spreadsheets. He doesn't really seem like that type of guy. What do you think that was it suggested that like, oh, it was less than 90 million?
And that's what I'm wondering. I feel like just based on his vibe that he would think that 90 sounds small. He was like, no, it's got to be at least 3 digits. I don't know.
Oh, because I thought maybe he would be like, oh no, actually it was only like 50. We did a lot with that little bit of money.
Yeah,
I
maybe
could take on that way. I mean, to me, if I'm Netflix, it's a no-brainer. Like 90 million for a movie like this, but you got to tack in a lot of marketing. Like this is, and it's not a traditional theatrical release, so you're not going to have like, you know, $120 million marketing campaign, which is easily for the old school like box office stuff.
Right.
But for this, it's sort of, he has a built-in audience. He has a sort of zealotry fan base. And you know what he's going to make. It's the perfect Netflix film because Netflix does not care about story. They do not care about high art for the most part, unless they're trying to win an Oscar, which they're not doing here. If it's not an Oscar thing to get them clout within the industry or to get bigger directors to come work with them, it's all about eyeballs and attention span. And Zack Snyder's the perfect Netflix guy because he's all about attention and eyeballs. He's not about anything else. And so you can sit here and watch this movie, and if you're even remotely engaged, there's going to be something there that's going to like at least keep you in front of the TV set. And that's like the goal of Netflix more than anything. They just want to keep your attention and want you to consume more and more minutes of their content. Anything else is kind of bullshit to them. And even they state that in their like corporate values, like they're not hiding that. I mean, it's you know, the famous line that Reed Hastings always had is like, we're not competing with HBO or cable TV. We're competing with sleep. You know, it's like one of those viewpoints that like, I mean, and that's why I think they picked it up. It's ultimately an attention grabbing film that will lead to a lot of minutes consumed, whether you're a Zack Snyder fan or not. Like, it's just going to be one of those movies that you have to see. It's number one right now. And I think has been since it came out on Friday on Netflix. So I think it's winning. Like, it's going to win and do exactly what they want to do. But it does, you know, and this got one of the reasons I wanted to pick this movie too, because it goes to this whole thing about Netflix and streaming movies and the new streaming world about like producing bigger movies. And, you know, here's a question for you. If this came out in the theater, do you think it would be successful?
Well,
based on that budget.
Yeah, based on that budget, oh man, my gut says no. Let me lay out why.
Yeah, give me
your I mean, the first kind of measurable piece of data that we can point to is that it was the Cinemark exclusive for 1 week only, right?
Yeah.
And it seems like, you know, you can go back and forth on whether or not people are willing to wait a week in this day and age, but ultimately it basically made no money in the theater in that 7-day period, like 600,000, something like that. I can't find the number in our notes here, but it's obscenely low, even in comparison to the really kind of depleted box office we've been dealing with in the pandemic, and including now like post-vaccination life. It's picking up slightly, but it does seem like there's been some heavy damage to the industry at large. If it was theater only and we weren't still recovering from a pandemic, I still think it would be difficult. I mean, you take a look at the slate of zombie movies in recent years, there hasn't really been a hit since the original Zombieland in 2009. So like that was another honest surprise when I heard that this was going to be Snyder's next vehicle, because it seemed like I thought we were over that. I feel like the only people that were doing zombie movies were if they were doing some kind of unique comedic twist on it, like Jim Jarmusch's The Dead Don't Die from a couple years ago, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. But this seems like while it's a mashup with the heist genre, which I'm all about, it's otherwise pretty paint by numbers. Like you said earlier, visually, there's a lot to appreciate about this guy and his vision. But when it comes to the story, Like, I think this is pretty perfect for Netflix because it's disposable popcorn movie, right? You can watch it, be entertained I'm doing air quotes right now, for 2.5 hours, and then just like immediately forget about it. But like for a movie to be successful at the box office, it not only needs that value, but it has to have like the replay value, the word of mouth value, and I just don't see that here. Do you?
No. I think, I'm looking at the numbers now, and I did 780K opening weekend. But the real key there is 1860 per theater, which is a terrible opening, like awful. Like for a good opening for a movie like this would be 5K per theater and on up to 10K, 12K. That's where you really kind of pop off. This failed. It's a failed experiment. It didn't work. If it had a full release, it would have made like 10 million, maybe, if it was lucky. There's something special about a box office hit that this doesn't have. It's too, and the thing is, it's not even too niche. It just doesn't have the sheen. It doesn't have the sort of maybe populist aspect to it that makes it interesting for a large group of people. That being said, people are going to sit home and watch this thing. They are.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't sitting home and watching a movie on Netflix is a different story than spending $15 and getting in a car and going and seeing it. It's a very different world. Mm-hmm. So I think it's going to be a win in the streaming sense, but I think it would have been a failure at the box office for the most part. Unless people saw it and there's good word of mouth and then it had like long legs or something like that. And so, I think it's one of those things where it works in exactly the way it was released. What do you think about, we know Zach Snyder pretty well, his style pretty well. How do you think it fits in terms of this production and what he did with it, with the rest of his work? Is it better than Batman versus Superman? Is it better than Man of Steel in terms of the look, the writing? What do you think? Where does this sit in his world?
I'd say it's probably up there with Legend of the Guardians, the Owls of Ga'Hoole. But really, it does seem like it's, once again, the lowest bar. But it didn't put me to sleep. And I was nervous about that because I started it at 10 o'clock at night, and I'm an old man.
Yeah. What night was it, though?
It was last night, Sunday night.
Wow.
I know.
Watch this whole thing till like midnight.
Yeah, I'm pretty proud / disappointed in myself.
Oh man. I stayed up late watching Mayor of Easttown last night. I'm feeling it right now.
Oh my gosh, what a binge!
What a reveal! What a reveal! Go watch that show instead of this.
Yeah, but I do think that like the connective thread between all his movies is that there's either no story or too much story.
But there's story here, right?
But okay, so maybe can we replace the word story with characters?
Okay, sure.
Because there's plot, but I would say even the plot, like there's nothing. They make a big deal about this safe, and it leads to like one cool splatter scene. Yeah. But other than that, like the actual heist is boring as hell.
So boring.
It's just so straightforward. And it's not because it's like economical, and it's not because like, I don't know, but like the characters were probably my biggest concern. Like I like Dave Bautista just fine. I think he's fun in Guardians of the Galaxy. I think his glasses are cool in Blade Runner 2049. Like he does. I don't think he's a leading man, and the fact that they gave him, nothing to really talk about. Yeah. There's a one scene in particular where he like, and I don't think this was a wink wink nudge nudge moment, but like he literally turns left to have like a serious boring heart to heart with his daughter, and then turns right to have a boring serious heart to heart with his, I don't know, friend / potential love interest.
Oh, his war partner or something.
Yeah. Team member? And that's the other aspect is like, other than Dave Bautista, like nobody has a proper backstory because they attempt to kind of cram it all into that stylish opening credits sequence, which I liked on the surface, but the more I thought about, I was like, that was frustrating because that was like, they cared more about having like the cool pop aesthetic of the song over the slow motion than actually really telling us anything interesting about the what led up to them wanting to do this heist.
Well, it's interesting too, because like when they greenlit this movie, I think they also greenlit a prequel called Army of Thieves, and then also an anime adaptation. And I kind of read a little bit about that's all going to be background and like character development. So in this 2-hour plus movie, they couldn't get to like basic character development. I mean, it's like, but the question that I have is, this thing is so long, it's so bloated. Here's essentially what happens. They get to Las Vegas, they go in, they try to do the heist. Some people live, some people die. There's lots of zombies. What do we make of this weird zombie hierarchy that's going on? Because these zombies are not Romero zombies. They're not even Dawn of the Dead zombies. They're not 28 Days Later zombies. They're not Return of the Living Dead zombies. They're like organized in like Planet of the Apes-esque. Right?
Okay. Once again, like so many aspects of this movie, I feel like that's a thing that on the surface, I was like, oh, that's interesting. But then they didn't do anything interesting with it.
No, there's like a queen and a king, and she's pregnant. And
yeah.
Spoiler alert.
But I did like that, like, we've seen the zombie movie tropes 1,000 times, and it's been pretty straightforward. Either they are one kind of zombie or they're the other. And this time, Snyder, in his classic, like, he wants to have his cake and eat it too fashion, he's like, why not both? Plus, like not even just like two separate groups, but like hierarchy, king and queen. But then they don't do anything really novel with that either. No. So it winds up just turning into like a bad subplot of season 7 of The Walking Dead or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like that's the part of this movie that does not work. I don't think at all. I mean, some of it does work, I think. And there's a lot of positive aspects to it. We can start talking about maybe like what other people are thinking about it. But I will say the backstory stuff that we talked about is a disaster. It makes no sense. Mm-hmm. There is that heart-to-heart scene where he talks about opening like a tofu stand. There's multiple scenes where he talks about opening.
That's the worst. That's so clearly from like a punch-up that they hired one of these four guys.
Yeah, they're like, we need to like, instead of splatter, we need to do like emotional splatter. You know what I mean, Zach? There's that one scene where you're like, okay, like I'm sort of interested, but you can't do the middle ground though.
No.
Right? Like what you could have done here is cut this thing down by like 30 minutes, take out all of the character development and just make it like a pure action piece. And I think it's going to do a lot better and make a little bit more sense. But I just don't find the zombies are not compelling. Like even the tiger zombie, you're like, this is stupid. Like it's not, I don't know who would be into that. It's kind of fascinating. Like, oh, that's kind of weird. And then it gets really old and it gets really odd.
Yeah.
There's the extended scene where it kills some kind of baddie dude. And it just like
Paul Reiser from Aliens character.
Yeah, exactly. The guy who works for the corporation. And it's an extended kill scene. And it just goes on and on. And I feel like that's one of the things, like the trademark of this film is he doesn't know when to stop. He doesn't know when to say no to himself. And I think that filters all the way into this entire streaming world and Netflix, floating tens of millions of dollars for these films. There's a freedom that's happening now that we probably have not happened since New Hollywood in the 70s, where it's not necessarily blank checks, but it's getting close to that feeling. And that's a double-edged thing. On the one hand, you get beautiful films that are just wonderful by great artists, and on the other hand you get sort of Zach Snyder's version. Like I think I was talking to my friend Pippa watching this movie, and I was like, this is like what somebody would have written if they're in eighth grade.
Oh yeah,
this is like an 8th grade script that he got made because he's famous and has a huge following and he can make a splashy movie, but there's nothing here that's artistically has any merit.
No,
or not a lot of merit in terms of just story and development and stuff like that. But I feel like I'm almost in the minority when I'm going through these critical responses. Like I'm blown away by these. What does the Rotten Tomatoes say?
Oh my gosh. So the Rotten Tomatoes, for whatever reason, is at a 75% for all critics, real score of 63, which is a pretty distinct difference.
That's pretty, pretty big.
And top critics at 77, real score 62, Metacritic at a 57. which makes way more sense.
Yeah.
Letterboxd at a 56, which makes more sense, though I was expecting it maybe to even be a few points lower than that. But then the Rotten Tomato audience score of 80, Metacritic audience score of 76, which is above IMDb somehow with 75. So like it's a classic example of you've got the fans that are going to love it because it, tickles their funny bone with the blood and the gore and the guns and the explosions. And it's bolstered by just enough poptimist critics to make it kind of an arguable success, at least conceptually. I mean, like you said, I think Netflix is going to get their minutes, their eyeballs that they wanted. But I am concerned about this nonsense with the prequel and the animated Las Vegas show because it's pretty emblematic. I mean, it definitely reminds me of Richard Kelly's Southland Tales and his attempts to kind of connect that universe with a comic book series,
which I have, by the way. I have all of it.
Yeah, you and Richard Kelly himself. Where it's just like one of the basic tenets of storytelling, especially for a 2-hour plus film, is like we shouldn't have to go and find other pieces to put the puzzle together.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. What I'm concerned about? I'm concerned about these critics. Like, this is freaking me out. Like, I'm reading through this stuff, and this is not computing to me at all. Has film criticism died?
Yeah, I have a theory, but go ahead and read a couple of these positives.
The A. Dowd one is the one that like really freaks me out because I love him as great writer. In a way, this B movie on an A budget gets closer to the values of George Romero, the godfather of zombie cinema, than Snyder's actual hyper adrenalized remake of Romero's masterpiece. Turning Vegas into a fallen kingdom, its towers of glamour and vice emptied out, at least superficially recalls the satiric function of the multi-tiered shopping mall of Dawn of the Dead, even if Snyder doesn't pull hard enough on that thread. That to me is a ridiculous statement. Like, honestly, like as someone who, like, I'm not a film studies major at all or anything like that, but like I at least am an art criticism person. Like, what's going on with that? That makes no sense.
So here's the thing. My theory is two-pronged. Number one, just like baseline, critics are excited to be going to press screenings again.
Sure. Okay. That's one thing. Yeah, definitely. I was thinking about that too. Yeah.
The magic of the movie house at work here. Because these are the type of people that are just completely done over by that. So I think that's part of it. But then also, and this was one of kind of the things that I sat with as the credits rolled, is that like I immediately had these like this nostalgic feeling of being in the theater when I went to see a midnight screening of the Romero Dawn of the Dead, where like I was just like flooded with, because it was sometime in college, so I was like flooded with all these like newfound theories that I had learned in film studies classes and how the allegory worked and all that, and I felt just so empty in this one. But then I got even angrier because like I thought about the symbolism of a destroyed city of money and the temperature check gun that the security guard points at people of color, and the word quarantine being thrown around and the word coyote being thrown around, but with no actual political undertones. It's just all coincidental.
It's kind of disgusting. It's like Snyder's using this vocabulary which he clearly doesn't understand, like these like political buzzwords, to kind of like pick and prod at people and get a reaction out of them, but he has nothing to say about any of those things.
No, he doesn't want to say anything either. No, he's just basking in the excess. And I think if there's a middling review from a critic that I respect a lot, that I can at least understand where they're coming from on a quasi-positive level, it's Justin Chang's LA Times review that you posted in our notes here. He wrote, "It's very much a Zack Snyder production, unwieldy but absorbing, awash in bone-crunching violence, stilted dialogue, ridiculous, verging on sublime needle drops, hello cranberries, and have it both ways political subtext." So, like, if you can wring enough of that out to feel like you had like a worthwhile popcorn experience, then maybe he's done what he's aimed to do. Since, like we said, he doesn't have anything to say, he doesn't want to say anything. Do we need to get down on his level at all, Dan?
I'm not going to. Like, I think that's what it comes down to. I refuse to. And like my middling review that I like was Mark Kermode, who I love.
He's your guy.
He's my guy. Not great, not terrible, but it really could just have been 90 minutes and done the same thing. That's an old curmudgeon way of saying, yeah, whatever. Like, it's kind of a throwaway. Yeah. I don't think that it's throwaway. I think it's worse than throwaway. Because, when these allusions to like Romero, which is obviously someone who I worship, and his work, this is not that, it's not the same medium at all. Like, this is commercial pop film that its only purpose is to get your attention and to keep it. It's supposed to go in one eye and out the other. Is that a statement? Sure, now it is.
In the eye.
And like you're not really, you're consuming, but it's not nourishing anything. It's just sort of like, oh yeah, it's like, I'm bored, so I want to watch Army of the Dead. Oh, that was kind of fun. You're probably on your computer while you're watching it, or you're just like, you're not gonna get something amazing out of that experience. Nobody watches this film and is like, that movie changed my life.
No.
And that should not be the barometer of greatness of all film or anything like that. But you can objectively say that nobody's saying that. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, on the one hand, as much as I want to give Zack Snyder a break and say, hey, he's back. Hey, this isn't as bad as Batman versus Superman. In a lot of ways, it's worse. Because like this is him like completely unfiltered. This is him with all his toys, all his special lenses that he bought on eBay from Japan. Going all in, and this is his final product. It's trash. Like, it's straight up trash. It's not good. And like, is it that different than Sucker Punch at the end of the day? Not really. And so I don't know. I mean, that's my viewpoint of it. It's like, the thing is, if the critics had just said, nah, it's whatever. If they were all like Mark Kermode, I wouldn't feel that negative about it. But when you start having, scores in the 80s of audience, and it's like, I get back into the moment when I was in Spider-Man 2 and everybody around me was laughing and carrying on in the theater. And I was like, this is terrible. What is wrong with you people? I just go back to that weird sort of like, this is not great cinema. This is not pure cinema, as Scorsese would say.
So I think the distinction between Army of the Dead and Sucker Punch can be parsed out by one of the Letterboxd user reviews. I think it's one of the highest, if not the highest, liked comment on Letterboxd about this film. Patrick Willems wrote, "I'm glad Zack Snyder got back to what he's good at, making dumb movies that know they're dumb instead of dumb movies that think they're really smart." And so I think in the course of our conversation, Dan, and maybe it's just my tendency to want to be polarizing with you, I think that's what it comes down to, is that Sucker Punch was around the time of his career, post Watchmen. He's in the depths of wanting to, but still like having his dumb tendencies, but wanting to wring something deep out of them. And it failed miserably, to the point where he thought he was making something feminist, but it was horribly misogynist instead.
Yeah.
And now maybe what he set out to do, to have this rebirth and go back to the beginning, he was at least marginally successful at. I think that there's no pretense here, and while that's not necessarily intellectually stimulating, it's at least honest. Intellectually honest, meaning there is no intellect involved.
What would you say to this, though? Like, I'm going to pull the white man card on this.
Oh, boy.
Right? Like, does Zack Snyder have any of this without the sort of privileges of his background?
No.
The answer's no. We all know the answer.
He directs a commercial for Nike the second he steps off of the stage with his diploma in Pasadena.
But even outside of that, like, if you go back to like his like what he's done since then and like his big movies.
Right.
I just don't, that's why I don't want to give him a pass, because it's like, look, man, you were born on third base.
Mhm.
And you've been given so many different chances, and like, yeah, okay, Army of the Dead's kind of fun. It's a dumb movie. You kind of know it's dumb. But do you really think that he thinks it's dumb? Like, I think he thinks it's some sort of like high art, like he's doing something amazing and special. And like, it's kind of, I think he thinks his wink wink is the high art. You know what I mean? Like, he thinks he's being postmodern. Postmodernism died like 30 years ago. It's like, what are you doing, man? Like, this isn't 1991. Like, I don't know. I mean, that's just my read on it. I mean, do you really think it's going to lead to a rebirth of Zack Snyder?
No, definitely not. Yeah. So that's not the right word. But I think it's more akin to maybe him becoming comfortable in his own skin. And part of that, of course, is like you said earlier, he's being unleashed with, all of his toys. Yeah. And so, but I think this is maybe as good as it gets for Zack Snyder.
Oh, I think so. Yeah. I think this is the best Zack Snyder film that'll ever be made.
Okay, we can agree there at least.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt about that. What do you any closing thoughts on this? Any sort of
I mean, you I think we would be remiss not to mention one of the, especially since I brought up the misogyny of Sucker Punch. One small area of growth for Snyder is that he when he understood the necessity of deleting Chris D'Elia from his shots, the canceled comedian who was caught sexually harassing underage girls on the internet. And then Snyder said, okay, let's take him out and replace him with somebody else. And he hires Tig Notaro. And she's one of the bright spots of the film.
The highlight of the film by far.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, even though once again, she's given basically no characterization, at the very least, it's somebody with screen presence. And I can't say that for much of any of the rest of the cast. And it's quite a step up. Not something I would have expected from Snyder of all people. To do.
It cost millions too. I mean, Netflix went on. They did an interview with Vanity Fair where they said it was in the millions of dollars to replace him, because it was totally shot with him. They'd go back and green screen everything, CGI her into every single scene, and so I mean, that was a kind of a statement I think that they were making overall, which is a good statement to make. I think at the end of the day, film's still terrible. What we got going on next week? Season 4, episode 2 of Film Trace. We're going to the past.
I'm excited for this one because I'm not sure we've done a legit romantic comedy on the show. No. And we're long overdue for it. So it is the 25th anniversary of the largely forgotten, but has, for whatever reason, a small piece of my heart, George Clooney, Michelle Pfeiffer rom-com One Fine Day from 1996. I do not think it's a good film, but I definitely think it's worth looking into 25 years later in particular. Yeah. And I am especially curious on your thoughts, Dan, because I know that when it comes to rom-coms, you'll watch anything.
It's a dead art, though, when you think about it. Rom-coms, they're dead.
But you still watch them like every day.
27 Dresses I watch like once a month, at least. Okay, thanks for listening, folks. This has been Film Trace. See you next week.